This is the only thing you can drink water out of. How much more fun is that? A tankard of water. Hey kitten, you gonna come sit with me? You are? Meow 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 meow. Non più tra I farfalloni amoro. I'm just gonna preface this video by saying I'm currently getting over pharyngitis, which is a throat thing, so if I sound a little funny today, hopefully I don't. That's why. Who's a fluffy potato? Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome to Upside Down Books. Today we're going to be looking at my top 10 historical fiction books and giving you guys some recommendations on the genre. I have already done one historical fiction recommendation video way back when I first started, but that was specifically for the World Wars. But yeah, so I was sort of brainstorming some ideas of other videos I could do for you guys, and I thought, you know what, I really want to keep talking about historical fiction. I love historical fiction, it's my life. As a quick backstory for any new subscribers out there in the crowd tonight, I studied history at university, so it's literally my life. I love history. Ask me all of your questions. I personally find historical fiction to be one of the more slippery genres to get into. I have fur all over my face. It's hard to find the book you like, it's hard to find the niche of history you like, it's hard to know exactly which author's style of writing you like and how much history you like in your fiction. And so I find that you've just got to give it a bit of a try and have an actual interest in history. The best way to overcome this if you're trying to get into historical fiction is to just give a few books a go and work out what's best, but also do your research. So today, all I really want to do is tell you what my favourite historical fiction books are at the moment and give you recommendations of what I believe to be the top 10 and very best historical fiction books out there. The first one on my list has always held quite the soft spot in my heart, and that one is People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks. This book is the historical fiction book for book lovers. The whole book is revolved around a character who has an interesting family situation, and we flip between past and present exploring her family situation and her work. Her job is that she's been given a super old Jewish religious book, I believe. I think it's been missing for 2,000 years and it's resurfaced, and her job is to go through it and see what's in the book and to look after it and restore it. And the way that the story's set up with flips back to the past is that as she goes through the book in her work, she finds various things stuck within the pages, whether it's a smear of blood, a grain of salt, a membrane part of a butterfly's wings, things like that, which is super interesting because unbeknown to her, we as readers then go back to the past and read the story of how those items ended up in the book. If you want to be in the best hands for reading historical fiction, then Geraldine Brooks is your girl. The next book I have on this list I originally wasn't going to put on my list because it's so talked about and so popular, and that is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. But I still feel like there are a lot of people out there who say, that they've heard of it and they've been told it's good and they're going to read it, but they haven't got to it yet. And so I'm here to tell you today, once more, that you need to pick up this book. Zusak has beautiful prose. He is just a joy to read on the page, and the fact that this one's narrated from death gives it a very unique perspective. Once again, I would say if the Geraldine Brooks style of writing and approach to writing history into fiction isn't quite for you and you need something that's reads maybe more to the rhythm of contemporary or YA books or fantasy, then yeah, Zusak is probably it for you. This is obviously historical fiction. It is focused on the story of the characters rather than the history though. It is putting some wonderful characters who are surrounded and entangled with death their whole life in a situation in Germany during World War II. If you're still really not sure if this is for you, and it is, I can almost guarantee you it is, go watch the film. Watch the film first. Do the simple thing, because the film is amazing and really, really just to the story. The next book on my pile here is Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein. I don't see enough people talk about this one. The thing that I love about this story is that it tells a really good story in a smaller page count number. Now this one also talks about an area of history I don't know much about. Now this one is about orphan trains, which is basically where orphans were taken throughout America on these trains and sort of sold off at various stations to be helpful hands to various people and families. The idea basically being to get orphans back into society so they're no one else's problem and to try and help maybe farmsteads out. The problem with that being that people had cheap labour and children and abuse and bad situations for the kids were very frequent. So this story follows a sort of troubled teenager in the present who ends up helping this elderly lady. And she learns the backstory of this elderly lady throughout her time working for her. I think she's helping clean her house or something like that. And she turns out to be one of the kids that was on the orphan train. So as we progress through the book, we slowly get the story of what happened to her in her life having been put on one of these orphan trains. It's heartbreaking, it's beautiful, it's a wonderful bridging of the years between the young and the old. And it's really, really easy to read. I really hope more people pick up this book because it's absolutely stunning. The next book I have here is something that a few more people are probably talking about and reading at the moment, and that one is Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Groudon. If you don't know, Ryan Groudon is one of my favourite authors, and I will always read all of her books, absolutely. Ryan Groudon has a real knack with writing alternate historical fiction, so this book is actually sci-fi under the historical fiction umbrella, which is slightly hard to get your head around sometimes. What she's done is she has reimagined history as if Hitler had won the war and explored a twist with sci-fi if Japan and Germany had joined forces and become like the main rulers of the world. It's really interesting. It's from a Jewish perspective and has some gorgeous characters. Ryan Groudon's characters are always very thoughtful and not overly complex but highly relatable, and just the kind of people you're like, damn, I wish I was them. So this is obviously quite easy to read, being more of a YA sci-fi sort of pacing. It's fast, it's interesting. The book 1 is slower than book 2, and this does come in a duology, but I can't recommend this one enough. So I would always say, for anyone who ever asks me, if they say they never read historical fiction but they want to give it a go, what would you try? I would honestly say, look, pick up some Ryan Groudon, give one of her books a go, definitely give Wolf by Wolf a go, and if you find that you enjoy that storyline, then you could probably push yourself forward to the next step, to something that doesn't have sci-fi in it and is just historical fiction. The next book I have for you, I've literally not talked or heard or seen anyone else talking about, and that is Madame Tussauds Apprentice by Kathleen Benner-Dubel. This one was insanely beautiful. There's a lot of French history I feel like I don't see in this particular vein of historical fiction. This is definitely meant for a younger audience with the way that it's read, as in younger audience being myself, 20 years old. This looks at the history of Madame Tussauds. You've probably heard of her, you're probably going, what is this book about? Apart from having the most gorgeous cover of all time, this is actually looking at Madame Tussauds' role during the French Revolution in 1789. This doesn't follow Madame Tussauds' perspective, but a couple of children, I believe, a brother and a sister, as they are trying to get by in this world. They're sort of street rats, they haven't got much of a place, and one of them, it might actually be best friends, I think, not brother and sister, but they basically end up getting taken into her world and helping, you know, obviously be her apprentice. It's really interesting because whilst the story is very much so about the characters and surviving in a very unsettled social class in France during this time, it also is sort of making circles around the big major historical events. So through exploring Madame Tussauds and what it's like to do waxworks and live in the 18th century in France, you also get some really good information about what was happening to the royal family and what happened during that time, what was the revolution, and what did that mean for people. So this is a really cool way of looking at that side of history. I'm coming. Would you like to come back in? I know. The next book I have to talk to you about is one that I've read recently and got sent for review, and I'm so glad that I did. Now that book is The Red Ribbon by Lucy Adlington. I am absolutely in love with this book and it's easily in my top 10. It was like the first book that I reached for when making this list. I'm really excited with the prospect of Adlington maybe bringing out more historical fiction, because this is written in a really interesting way in regards to the approach to narration of an historical fiction book. This is definitely a book where the story is about the characters, the story is about the fiction, and the story is about the journey between the four girls it revolves around, but it happens to be in a historical setting. So this is a very poignant setting, and Adlington's done a wonderful job with it. Throughout the entire book she never uses labels. The word Nazi is not used, the word Jew isn't used, etc. Things like that. The narrator for this one is very young, so it's a very naive perspective. It very much so reminded me of The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas and the sort of child's approach to a serious topic. And the whole duration of the story takes place within a concentration camp within Auschwitz itself. So it's very serious and it's in the most notorious concentration camp. But the story has a look at what happened to women inside the camps who weren't killed off straight away, the ones who worked. It's a really cool look into it, and I really wish more people would read this. It came out this year, so it's all new, because it's just something totally new. It's something I hadn't really come across before. So it doesn't matter how much you learn about the world wars or any part of history, there's always something that has escaped your notice. I highly recommend this one. I really highly recommend it. It's easy to read, and because of its lack of like intense focus on historical fiction, and because of the fact it doesn't use labels, it makes it really relatable. It makes you able to relate to the characters more because you've not got the barriers of labels separating you. I feel like my voice is starting to sound worse. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Nightingale by Kristen Hannah. This is probably my favourite historical fiction book. This one is set in Paris / some other areas in France when it was occupied by Nazis during World War II. It's quite a big book, but I was thoroughly surprised by how quickly I was turning the pages to get through this one. It follows the story of two sisters who are quite diverse in their personalities and character traits, and one is very much so more of a socialite whilst the other is a family girl. And she is married, her husband is a prisoner of war, I'm not sure where he's being held, I can't remember now, and she has a young daughter. During her time throughout the occupation of France, she has a Nazi who is billeted with her, and he's a fairly sympathetic Nazi. So it explores some very interesting themes because you're confronted with an enemy who is not acting like the enemy should, but you, for all intents and purposes, there's absolutely nothing you can do to try and bridge the gap of friendship there because, you know, it's because of him your husband's in prison and dying, so it's a very mentally conflicting situation. It's a gorgeous story because there's the added mystery that every now and again we're given a present day, as in present time, chapter. And we know that it is one of the sisters talking about her life and at the end of her life and things like that, but we don't know which one it is, and you don't find out which one made it through the war until the very end of the book, and it's gorgeous. The characters that Kristen Hannah writes are so real. She's the type of author that will really make you feel the emotions that they're feeling. She's that good at writing. Following on from that one, I decided that I would include The Great Alone on this list, also by Kristen Hannah. This one is historical fiction in the way that it is like a chick lit read. This one is very much so more of a contemporary sort of read, but it's set in history and focuses on issues in history more related to gender roles, which I find interesting because I've not read a lot of books like that that are classified, I guess, as historical fiction, but are looking at the role of women in a very sort of convoluted way. So really this is loosely coming on this list because I'm not looking at like a distant past. I believe this one starts in the 70s. This one is set in Alaska and follows a fairly broken family, a father who's just come back from the Vietnam War and has severe PTSD, but he also has quite an aggressive and abusive streak. The mother loves him and she can't walk away from him, and her daughter Lenny, from whose perspective the book is told, they're just trying to make it work. They're trying to tiptoe around him, not upset him, nothing like that, so that they can just be a normal family. A decision is eventually made with one of his Vietnam comrades who was killed during the war, leaves them some land in remote Alaska. No running water, they hunt for their own food, no electricity, no flushing toilets, etc, etc, things like that. They do everything themselves there. So it's a really beautiful story of the ties of family and the strength of character that some people have to put up in order to get by in life. I highly recommend grabbing a copy of this one, especially if you've read Hannah's other works as well, because this one is just as good. Now I just have two more books to wrap up on this list here. I apologise for this video being so long, so let's try and do these ones quickly. The first one is The Watchmaker of Filigree Street by Natasha Pulley. This one is a beautiful LGBT steampunky sort of feel book. It's not steampunk, but because it's so involved with clockwork, it's so tempting to call it steampunk. It's set in London and the main character is British and he becomes involved with a Japanese watchmaker. He has a pocket watch which basically went off as an alarm to warn him of when this bomb was going to go off, so it follows this mystery of trying to work out who gave him the watch, who made the watch, and whether they were linked to the bombings that were happening throughout London at the time. It's set in a really interesting period of unrest in London, but it has some interesting snippets when we follow the Japanese character Mori as he goes back to Japan, or looking at his past in Japan in a very different setting to what we've been seeing in the London setting. And we are also getting a sequel to follow this one up. It has some awesome characters in it, it's got some beautiful storytelling. The LGBT thread through it is really subtle but absolutely gorgeous when it really comes to light at the end, and there's a mechanical octopus in it, which is definitely the highlight of the book. And the final book that I wanted to talk about, and I could not put on this list, was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. This one reads as more of a contemporary book and has been frequently compared to Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens by Becky Albertalli, but in the 1700s. This is set in England / just the European continent because the two boys that are in this book are going on their grand tour. So if you've never encountered the idea of the grand tour where British men used to go on a tour around Europe and learn about other cultures, then this is a great way to sort of learn how well about that, but mostly it goes quite wrong in this book. There's some really great characters in this, it explores some really interesting ideas, and it explores a really cool snippet of the world from a couple hundred years ago when it doesn't seem that different to today, but it is very much so different than what we know regardless. The expectations of the characters in this one and the social standing between men and women is also really well explored. So this one's a really cool way, once again, of looking at the gender equality and the gender balance in history as well. Okay, but that brings me to the end of my top 10 books for historical fiction and some recommendations for you guys. I hope you enjoyed that one. Let me know in the comments down below what your favourite historical fiction book is, but other than that, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye!